On the day Lina gave birth to triplets, her husband walked out and never returned. Left in a small coastal village with nothing, she carried her babies in baskets to the market, sold fish in the smoke and heat, and fought to keep them alive. Yet just as success seemed certain, one of them vanished. And the call she received that night was only the beginning of a twist no one could have imagined. If you love stories that pull you in and don't let go, subscribe to Savanna Storytime, where every chapter leaves you hungry for the next. The rooster's cry broke the silence of Amaputu village before the sun had even touched the palm trees. The air was damp with the smell of rain that had fallen in the night, and from far off came the sound of waves pushing against the shore. Inside a small mud-walled hut, a young woman lay on a raffia mat. Her skin glistened with sweat, her breath uneven. Beside her, 3 tiny bundles wailed in turns, as if they had made an agreement not to cry together. The newborns were wrapped in old pieces of cloth, the kind so thin you could see the outline of their little fists. By the doorway, the midwife whispered something to the women gathered outside. Their murmurs grew quickly. 3 at once? Ah, poor Lina. How will she feed them? They say triplets are a blessing, but to a poor man, they are curses. The women's voices floated into the hut like cold wind. Lina heard every word. She wanted to tell them to leave, but her voice was weak. Tavari, her husband, stood against the far wall, his arms crossed. His eyes moved from the babies to the cracked floor, then to the open door. He had not smiled once since the midwife had announced the 3rd child. That night, after the visitors had gone and the lamp burned low, Tavari ensured that Lina and the whole village were asleep before escaping into the night. Before the first light of morning, Lina woke to find the mat beside hers empty. Tavari was gone. There was no note, no farewell. She searched everywhere for him in the village, but couldn't find him. Days passed, then weeks and months, until she came to realize that he had left for good. That afternoon, Lina went to the edge of the village, where her father's grave lay under the shade of an almond tree. She sat there with her 3 sons sleeping in a basket she carried. A thought flashed before her to abandon the babies and also run for her life. She pressed her palm against the gravestone, as if her father could feel her touch. "Baba," she said softly, "they say my sons will eat me to the bone. The villagers say they have no hope but to grow into thieves. But you will see, these 3 will be sons that light the world." The wind moved through the palm leaves above her. Somewhere in the distance, the sea kept beating against the shore, as if it too had promised not to stop. The mornings in Amaputu began with the smell of wood smoke. Lina rose before the first cockcrow, tied a wrapper around her waist, and carried her fish basket to the shoreline. When the triplets were still small enough to fit in woven baskets, she would lay them side by side in the shade of her stall, their tiny hands reaching for nothing in particular. She hawked her fish through the market lanes with the baskets balanced near her feet, stopping often to check on them. Sometimes she carried them on her back one after another, the others tucked safely with a neighbor while she sold. The fishermen's canoes returned at dawn, their paddles slicing through the mist. Lina bought what she could afford, small silver fish with bright eyes, and carried them to her stall at the market. By mid-morning, the sun pressed down hard on the tin roofs. Lina sat behind her table, turning the fish over a smoking fire until their skin curled and cracked. The air around her was thick with the smell of salt and char, and the smoke stung her eyes until tears came. She wiped them with the back of her hand and kept working. As the years passed, the babies in the baskets became boys and enrolled in the public school in the village. They also helped Lina in the market every day after school. By this time, they were 8 years old. It was on a general market that a traveling pastor stopped in front of her stall. He was tall and lean, with a face that looked like it had seen many roads. He watched for a while before speaking. "These boys," he said, "they are sharp, good marketing skills, and I can see it in their eyes. But do they go to school?" Lina smiled faintly. She was used to people noticing the boys, though not always with kindness. "They are always the top 3 students in their class, and they help me here after school," she replied. The pastor nodded. "If you don't mind, there is a scholarship in Lacoma City. It is not easy to get, but I know the man who runs it. Let me put their names forward." The words entered Lina's ears like the first rain after a long, dry season. She thanked him, but her mind was racing. A chance in the city meant a chance to break free from the salt, the smoke, and the whispers. That night, when the boys were asleep, she sat in the doorway of their hut and looked out toward the sea. The moonlight made the waves look like silver plates stacked one after another. She thought of the scholarship, of the city she had never seen, and of the promise she had made at her father's grave. The next morning, she began to prepare. Lacoma City smelled different from Amaputu. The air was heavy with petrol and frying oil, and the noise came from every direction. Cars honked without patience. Motorcycles swerved between buses that roared like angry bulls. Above it all, glass towers stood like giants, their sides catching the sun and throwing it back in blinding flashes. Lina and her sons arrived with one small bag each. The pastor's contact had found them a single room in Iron Bend, a crowded part of the city where the buildings leaned into each other like tired men. The walls of their rooms sweated when it rained, and the ceiling was patched with flattened tin. School in the city was a battlefield. The other children laughed at the way Cairo, Ziv, and Amari spoke. They called them bush boys and pointed at their uniforms, which were secondhand. At lunch, the triplets often sat alone, eating from the same small bowl Lina had packed. Lina took work wherever she could find it. In the mornings, she washed clothes for families who lived in the taller, brighter parts of the city. In the evenings, she fried puff-puff by the roadside, her hands moving quickly to turn each ball in the hot oil. Whenever the boys complained, Lina would sit them down and say the same words. "One day, wealth will be our servant, not our master. Until then, we must work harder than hunger." Then, the turning point came quietly. In the city, trouble found all 3 boys, but Amari carried the heaviest share. He was smaller than his brothers and quieter, too. His gift for drawing, instead of protecting him, made him a target. Some days, boys in his class would snatch his sketches and laugh as they passed them around. Other days, they would tear them into pieces while he watched, the sound of the paper ripping louder than the noise in the room. Cairo and Ziv never let it pass. If they heard Amari had been teased, they would walk into the classroom in the middle of a lesson, fists ready, their faces daring anyone to touch him again. Teachers called them troublemakers. Other boys called them dangerous. It reached a breaking point one hot afternoon. Amari had drawn his best work yet, a portrait of the science teacher so perfect it seemed ready to speak. He carried it carefully, proud of what his hands had made. But during lunch, a group of older boys cornered him, grabbed the drawing, and tore it down the middle. Cairo and Ziv saw it happen. They did not think. Chairs scraped, fists flew, and desks toppled over. By the time the teachers rushed in, 3 boys were nursing swollen lips. One of them was the principal's son. The punishment was swift and heavy. Cairo and Ziv were suspended on the spot, the principal making it clear they would not step into his school again until she allowed it. Amari stood by as his brothers gathered their things. Then, without a word, he picked up his own bag. He was not on the suspension list, but he walked with them out of the school gate all the same. His eyes were wet, his voice shaking. "I can't stay without you," he said. However, from that day, none of them returned to school. Even after the principal lifted the suspension, they did not tell Lina. For 2 months, the triplets stayed away from school. Each morning, they left the house with their bags, but instead of walking to class, they wandered the streets. It was during the exam period that the truth found her. One afternoon, as she turned puff-puff in the sizzling oil, a teacher from the school stopped at her stall. "Sister Lina," the woman said gently, "why haven't the boys been in class for 2 months now?" The words struck like a blow. Lina's hands froze over the pan. "What do you mean?" she asked. They stopped even after the principal lifted the suspension. Lina's knees weakened. She set the spoon down and covered her face with her flour-dusted hands. The oil hissed, but all she could hear was the pounding in her chest. That evening she went to the school, begging for her sons to be allowed back, but the principal was unmoved. "They're scholarship students, laid hands on my child and stopped coming for 2 good months. They will not return," she said. She left the building with tears blurring her vision. In the narrow streets of Iron Bend, the boys were already known. They had fought others. They had stolen things. A loaf of bread here, a bottle of soda there. The pastor came to see her. He stood with his arms crossed, disappointment heavy in his voice. "I believed in them," he said. "I believed in you, but maybe I was wrong." Then he turned and walked away without a prayer. By now, the boys were 10. Life without school gave them too many empty hours, and empty hours in Iron Bend often led to trouble. They drifted through the streets, watching the days pass. Cairo and Ziv could fight anyone who tried to push them around, but they had no trade, no skill that could fill their pockets. Rather, they sold Amari's paintings on the street. Weeks turned into months. One evening, after a day of selling, Amari returned home with a detailed portrait of the governor, drawn from a newspaper photograph. The lines were bold, the expression alive. It was his best work yet. But there was a problem. "Who will see it here?" Amari asked. "The governor will see it if we take it to him." Ziv grinned. "And we know how to get inside." The governor's mansion stood on a hill, guarded by high walls and a heavy black gate. But Cairo and Ziv, they waited until the afternoon. They slipped past the first gate when a delivery truck pulled in. They had taken only a few steps toward the front door when a voice shouted behind them. "Hey, you two, stop there!" The guards ran up, grabbing them by the arms. Hands searched their pockets, expecting to find stolen phones or wallets. Instead, they pulled out the rolled-up paper. "What's this?" one guard asked. They opened it. The governor's face stared back at them in perfect pencil strokes. For a moment, no one spoke. Another voice came from the driveway. "What's going on here?" It was the governor himself, stepping out of a black car. He saw the drawing and his expression softened. "Who drew this?" he asked. "My brother," Cairo said, nodding toward the gate. "Bring him in," the governor said. Outside, they found Amari, waiting and frozen, unsure whether to run or stay. The guards led Amari through the gate, his bare feet silent on the driveway stones. "You made this?" the governor asked, holding up the portrait. "Yes, sir," Amari said softly. The governor studied the work again, as if looking for proof that a boy could make something so alive. Then he smiled. "You have a gift, and gifts like this shouldn't be hidden in the street." He invited the boys inside. They sat in a room with soft chairs and cold drinks, answering questions about where they lived and how Amari had learned to draw. The governor had decided Amari would enter a national art competition, and he would be trained by the best artists in the city. That afternoon, 3 boys rode through Iron Bend in a convoy of escort cars, the sirens, the cars that turned every head. Lina was at her puff-puff stall, flipping dough balls in the hot oil. When she saw the convoy in police uniforms step out of the first car, her heart pounded. She dropped her spoon and took a step back. "Please, I didn't do anything," she said. "Mama, wait, it's us," Amari's voice called. The pastor was nearby, buying plantain chips. When he saw the scene, he rushed over, pointing at the boys. "Don't pity them! Arrest them! They have been stealing." He stopped mid-sentence when the governor stepped out of the car. The street went silent. The governor shook Lina's hand and told her about Amari's gift, about the competition, and about how her sons had come to his house with nothing more than a portrait. The pastor stood to the side, his mouth open, his chips forgotten in his hand. From that day, Amari's world opened wider than he had ever imagined. The governor kept his word, enrolling him in art classes with masters who taught him how to turn his raw talent into something greater. He learned to mix colors, to shade with precision, to bring light and life into every stroke. When the national competition came, Amari stood before a crowd in a hall so bright it felt like daylight had moved inside. He unveiled a painting of a fisherman casting his net at sunrise, the water glowing with gold. It won first place. Newspapers carried his name. Strangers came to see the boy from Iron Bend, whose hands could tell stories without words. Galleries began to display his work. Collectors from other countries flew in to buy it. His portraits appeared in national buildings and private collections. In 2 years, Amari was called the best young artist in Africa. Cairo and Ziv never left his side. They became his protectors, managers, and brothers in every sense of the word. Lina watched them from her new boutique, her pride almost too heavy to carry. Now the world knew them. The triplets turned 16 on a Saturday that began with sunshine but ended in shadows. Lina had been up since dawn, cooking their favorite meal, her heart full as she thought of how far they had come. Cairo and Ziv were home, laughing over something on the radio. Amari's chair sat empty. "He went out early," Ziv said he wanted to finish something before the day got busy. Hours passed, no sign of him. Lina called his phone again and again, but it rang unanswered. They informed the police instantly. The afternoon stretched into evening, and the laughter in the house faded into silence. It was clear that Amari was missing. The police were already looking, and someone from the governor's office had called to check on Lina. A security camera from a shop near the harbor had caught something. The grainy footage showed Amari, unconscious, being lifted by 2 men into a white bus. The license plate was hidden, the bus drove away, and no one had seen it since. Lina's phone rang. The number was strange, unfamiliar. She answered. "Hello? Who is this? Where is my son?" The voice on the other end was faint, almost swallowed by static. The words were broken, the meaning slipping away before she could grasp it. And then the line went dead. She sat frozen, the phone still in her hand, when a knock came at the door. Slowly, she opened it. The man standing there was older, his face lined by time, but there was no mistaking him. Her lips parted and a single name left her mouth, trembling. Tavari. The man who had left her with 3 babies stood in her doorway. The questions began before the scene could even fade. Was Tavari behind Amari's disappearance? Had he returned to help or to finish what he started years ago? And who was on the other end of that strange call? What do you think happened? Drop your guesses in the comments, and let's see who comes closest when part 2 arrives. The answers will begin in part 2, so hit subscribe to Savanna Storytime and be the first to know when the next twist drops.